Hey everybody, I have a bit of a different style video today that I'm going to do, and that is I'm going to talk about, in my opinion, some of the cool products that I've come in contact with over the years that are not your perhaps basic sort of paint and brushes and things that you would automatically know about kind of upon initial inspection and getting into the miniature wargaming hobby for painting and modeling, but really the sort of more technical products or tools that you pick up over time that become somewhat indispensable to you and over time, and you just sort of appreciate them as something that you were able to kind of discover along the way. Now everyone's going to have a different set of products here that is an experienced sort of hobbyist, but and there are a lot of notable mentions or ones that I'd like to add to the list, but I'm going to stick to 10, and I'm going to go in order from 10 to 1 and just talk about the products that I think are really cool and really enhance my hobby. And so starting with number 10, what I have are these things here, which kind of look like brushes when I show them initially, but what they really are hobby shapers, or are sculpting shapers is what I should say. They're clay shapers, and so they kind of go by a number of different names. They have silicone tips, and they basically bend. They have different shapes on the top. You can get them in a number of different styles. I have sort of a block style, like with a block brush, and a round tip like you would have with a brush. And you use these essentially to smooth out clay when you're doing sculpting or conversions on your miniatures or anything where you have to add putty, and you don't want to create a hard edge, but you want to kind of smoothly make some changes to the putty as it's hardening. And one of the nice things about these is that they are the silicone tips tend not to stick when you wet them to any sort of green stuff or other kinds of two-part epoxies and clays. And so they're really, really helpful to get different kinds of detail. And just to show you here, they are clay shaper is the term that they refer to on here. These are by Royal Sovereign Ltd, but I bought them here in Canada. Usually you can get them at art stores, but I think they come in a lot of different brands. So number 10, clay shapers. Number 9, Microset and Microset. So many of you may be familiar with these. When you look into doing decals or decals, depending on the world and where in the world you are located, you can use these to essentially initially prepare a decal for a surface area on, plastic model or even a metal model per se. It sort of takes that decal and softens it and allows it to conform the shape and set onto the model better. Once you have used the Microset for that, the Microset allows you to continue to soften it, conform to really, really different kinds of irregular surfaces to make that decal really conform to the model. And so there are a couple of different products that are similar to this out there, but I found to be these ones really good, and they are oftentimes ones that hobbyists, experienced hobbyists, will sort of speak very highly of. And so these are really great, and so that's why they fall into my number 9 of my top hobbying products. Number 8. This is the Masters Brush Cleaner and Preserver. I think this is I know there are other kinds of brands that make this, but this is definitely the prototype, like the sort of one that you normally see people use from all kinds of forms of art that are working with paint. This works for oil paint, wet oil paint, dry oil paint. It says watercolor, acrylic, and stain, so it's used quite a bit. I've had this for a long time. You can see I've barely made a dent, and I've used it for years. They do sell ones that go like down to here. I can't imagine needing to get a bigger one at this point for me. This is just, it is like a type of soap that essentially will clean your brush really, really well and preserve it and take care of it. And it's really, really important to take care of our expensive brushes, and I find this is probably the best tool I have in order to do that. So that was number 8. Number 7, this is a bit of an awkward one to bring into here, but this is more of a tool, and this is the Dremel. And so I've brought my Dremel set of drills because we oftentimes will use a pin vise, and I kind of, in a lot of ways, have eliminated the hand pin vices. As much as they're excellent, I've really loved my Dremel for lots of things within the hobby. I use it as a pin vise. I use it to, literally, I use abrasive wheels to like sand down big resin kits that have like large pieces of flash on them. You know, I can use it to put holes and stuff. Like, you know, there's just so many things that I can use it for that I found it, particularly with making terrain and prepping larger resin models. And then in some cases, even some metal models at times, various things that I need done, I found that the Dremel is an excellent sort of tool. And one thing I will say is it is a little pricey. I don't have a price offhand. I do think there are different kinds of models, and it changes over time, models of the Dremel, and so you'd have to price it out. They have little ones, I think, that even scale down the process, but I found this one to be, it is a little overpowered, but you have to be careful. I don't put it on too high, but I found it excellent for things that I want to do in the hobby. And so it's a great tool that goes beyond the basics, you know, when I first started. So now we are at number 6. On number 6, this I believe is made by a number of different companies. It's a style you will see oftentimes within our hobby, and they usually will call it the helping hand magnifier. It usually has these things that you can clip onto. I find just having, with my painting, and particularly when I'm doing faces and small details, and particularly now that in the last couple of years where I've tried to work on and do more faces and eyes, I found the magnifier to be irreplaceable. I can't imagine trying to do eyes on smaller miniatures without a magnifying glass at this point. I will use it for other things at times, and it's funny because it may be a reflection of my eyes getting worse over the years. That's possible. My prescription hasn't changed much, but I do find that the magnifying glass has become a more and more indispensable part of my hobby repertoire. So that was number 6, and that is what I will call the Helping Hands magnifier. I've seen more than one company market it with that name. We are halfway through at number 5. Now, although I try to stay away from basic things and try to find more interesting things that you wouldn't think of, I felt I needed to start putting in a couple of things that really stood out for me over the years, and that is I feel that I've found with Vallejo and their Metal Color Airbrush Colors a wonderful series of metallic paints. Extremely thin, and that's the only thing maybe that's negative, is that you do have to be careful because they have a very high capillary action with them, and they can kind of go to not only where you want them to go, but to other places if you're not careful. But also, because they're extremely thin and very brilliant in their metallic paint luster, I found them to be really, really good. And there was a time when I was looking into sort of alcohol-based metallic paints like the liquid gold products and things, and to be honest, once I found this, I found the utility and easiness to work with them and the result to be a very, very good combination, and I just absolutely love them. And so I do have, I've not used all of them, but I oftentimes will use the dark aluminum. I also have a burnt iron for a duller iron effect, and I use a white aluminum for either really bright metallic or even for highlights and to mix with the others. And then of course gold. And so I would like to pick up more of these and experiment more with them, but these 4 alone have been extremely helpful for me. And so the metallic Metal Color Airbrush Colors by Vallejo comes in at number 5 on the 10-point scale. And now that I'm at sort of the half point here, I will mention, I think I started in the beginning, but you could rate this a number of ways, but the way I kind of have rated this is which are the ones that I would consider more and more indispensable. And it's not perfect. Some of them may end up, perhaps should be one spot different, but in quickly looking at this was sort of my order in determining which ones have been fairly indispensable for me over the years, and great sort of ones to pick up. So for number 4, I have Army Painter inks. Now, they do make a lot of colored inks. I don't tend to use those. I tend to use the traditional strong tones and soft tones. I have also used the Army Painter Quick Shades, and they are great products as well. Although I have found that I have gravitated away from using quick shades because I like to have a little bit more control of my highlight and the texture on my miniatures, and I find the quick shade, although providing a wonderful, amazing contrast and really allowing a nice balance of shading and highlights with sort of very little work by dipping. I found using their soft, they even say, they call these ink quick shades on here if you look at them. They're not unlike quick shade in much of the principle, but I find these inks, for me, work a bit more like shading glazes, which I call them sort of like a glaze for shading, because I find they will have a bit of a glaze effect rather than a wash. They don't immediately go to the recesses, but they will cover and filter the model I'm painting and create a nice gradual soft look. Now, they call one of them a soft tone and one strong, but I find both of them to be softer than the actual quick shade product and a little bit better to work with when you're using multiple techniques. Whereas I find the quick shade product, although you can do multiple techniques over them, I find them a little bit harder to work with when providing a variety of highlights and shading. And so I really love the Army Painter inks, in particular the strong tone and the soft tone, and they are a really big part of my repertoire at times. So that was number 4, and now we're going on to number 3. Now, Vallejo hits the list twice. I do like Vallejo products, and there are many more I could mention, but one of the ones that I really needed to mention today were the various varnishes that Vallejo does. Now, it's escaping me as to how I didn't grab the matte medium, but I have in front of you the matte varnish. I have in front of you the gloss varnish and the satin varnish. I also use the matte varnish quite often. And essentially, as I see it, your satin varnish is sort of in between your matte, which is a bit like a duller, cloudier sort of varnish, and your gloss, which is a shinier, clearer kind of varnish. And this one can be too shiny at times. The matte can be too cloudy and take sort of the luster but not create a shininess. I used to oftentimes mix the matte varnish and the gloss varnish 50-50 to get a satin effect. Initially, when using the satin, I didn't quite like it. I wasn't sure if I got exactly the 50-50 that I used to look for, and it might have been how I was watering it down. But over time, I've come to really like the satin varnish, and now I do buy it and use it quite often, just watered down alone, not with the gloss or the matte that I would normally be holding here. And so, essentially, I highly recommend these, and I like to use them oftentimes through the airbrush, watered down. They really work well through the airbrush. But also, I can water them down and use them with my brush on models, so they're extremely versatile. Varnishing is really important to me to protect miniatures, but it's also sometimes used as an intermediate step to allow washes to go quickly into the crevices of models and to protect work at certain points when you're at certain stages of your project. And so I find varnishing to be a really great tool, and that's why I would highly recommend the Vallejo varnishes. We are really getting down on the list, and so what I have next for number 2 may be no surprise to my regular viewers on the channel. But number 2, and really fighting with my number 1 spot for that number 1 spot and just missing out on that number 1 spot, is epoxy sculpt. I find I like to do sculpting, I like to do terrain projects, and I like having a really good 2-part epoxy sculpt that's not going to break like a natural clay easily, that's very tough, that really can hold detail well, that has a really short curing time. Something that can be like green stuff for me, but also a lot cheaper, because I find green stuff could be very much on this list, and I use green stuff at times, but I find Kneadatite and green stuff to be, particularly for terrain projects I want to do, cost prohibitive. I find that it perfectly works for me for miniatures, but when I want to do bigger projects, I find it's cost prohibitive. And I can do a lot of stuff even with miniatures with epoxy sculpt. This is made by Aves, as you can see. I'm already on, this is my second batch here that I'm just about on. Comes in different colors, and I don't know, when I've done the pricing, I've kind of figured out that it probably is somewhere around 1/8 the price if you get it in a batch like this of green stuff. It's quite a bit different, 1/4 to 1/8 depending on, you know, so it's quite significantly different when you buy it in bulk than green stuff, and really wonderful to work with. And I have a review on my channel of this product if you're interested in knowing more about it. Okay, so that is number 2. So what could be better than epoxy sculpt and have the number 1 slot for miniature wargaming hobby products that I find indispensable? Now this one, as I said before, it's probably based on just how often I use it and how much I like it. It feels boring compared to some of the other ones that I've picked, but I really felt I had to give it the number 1 spot because in some ways I use it for every single project I do. It is Liquitex Flowaid. Now, a lot of people can easily, of course, get by without using this at all. This is mixed into a this is a concentrate. You mix it 1 to 20 with water, so essentially like 1 ml of this to 19 mLs of water, or 20 if you want to, kind of be adventurous and not go exactly with the ratio. And so this is really great to allow paint with water to flow and, to thin it in such a way that it flows over your model really well. And I find in some ways by using the Flowaid I probably am able to use less water at times just because of the way it works. It will, if using too much of it, kind of get you that capillary effect action that sometimes we really like when we want to thin things out. But I find using this and just water is really my go-to thinning product when I work with most of the paints I work with. Because I primarily work with Games Workshop, Vallejo, and Coat d'Arms products, I've been very successful in using this Liquitex Flowaid product. There may be paint products that this doesn't work as well with. Just because I haven't experienced them and worked with them, I don't really know. It just, most of the main ones I work with, it works great. And so I use this for really everything I'm painting, because everything I water down I have the Liquitex Flowaid in. It's very rare that I would choose not to use the mixture and just go with straight water. And so I put it at number 1 of something that is really indispensable for me. And as much as this can be a little pricey, like at a place like Michael's when you first buy it, I don't know if it's between $10 and $20, but just for something that you're thinning your paints out with, it may seem pricey. This is a concentrate, and it lasts a really long time. I think I'm on my 2nd bottle of this. It really takes me a while to get through it, even though I use it all the time. And so really, in the end, it's really cheap, in my opinion. I could think of notable mentions like my hot wire foam cutter is another tool that I would like to put in here. Maybe that would be considered for a number 11. There are other products like the Vallejo Model Wash line for washes that I really, really like and work completely different than the Army Painter ink sort of they're ink quick shades, but as I said, I like to look at them as filters or Well, you know, I essentially have them on there like a glaze is the word I'm looking for, and I mentioned before. And there are other products as well that I could easily throw in here for primers and other things. But that is my top 10, and I hope for those of you that might be new in the hobby, one or two of them may even be something you might not have heard of or never tried. And for those of you that are experienced in the hobby, I'm interested in maybe what your favorite products are, like in the comments, or what your top 10 would be, and also what your thoughts are on these products. Okay, take care.